Hi, friends. I'm excited to bring you an interview with my friend Lauren Santerre, spiritual director and Christian mystic. We're talking about the transitions she went through when she left a job she loved, got married, decided to have a child, and moved to the suburbs. It's pretty obvious that becoming a mom involves a massive change in identity, but it seems like most people want to hear the good parts, not how difficult that transition can be. But Lauren was brave enough to talk about the ways that time felt like the death of her previous self. And in the next episode, we'll talk rebirth, both for her personally and in the Christian tradition around resurrection. So here's a short introduction to my guest today. Lauren Santerre is a spiritual director and likes to think of herself as a modern-day mystic. She loves God passionately and does her best to love others. Before becoming a full-time stay-at-home mom, Lauren served as a hospice chaplain for Silverado Hospice, North Houston. Previously, she was the director of interfaith relations for Interfaith Ministries Greater Houston and the executive director for Bridget's Place in Houston, Texas. She received her BA in religion from the Colorado College, her MA in urban ministry from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and her MA in spiritual direction from Houston Graduate School of Theology. Lauren married her wonderful husband, Randy Saad, in 2015, and they live northeast of Houston with their daughter, Vivian Rose. Lauren, Randy, and Vivian are members of Atascocita United Methodist Church, and Lauren will be serving as the president of the women's ministry team in 2021. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Lauren. Welcome to Letting Grow, the podcast about one of the spiritual journey's most difficult and courageous moments, letting go of who we think we should be so we can grow into who we most deeply are. I'm your host, Claire Villarreal, and I appreciate your joining me today.
Well, I'm so excited to be having this conversation today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren, and I am a spiritual director currently and full-time mom. And a lot of people don't know what spiritual direction is. So let me just kind of take a second for that. But basically, it's just helping people to navigate their spiritual life and their spiritual journey. And primarily what spiritual directors have done throughout history is to help people to identify places of challenge, of resistance, of possible places of being stuck in their life when it comes to their spiritual journey and how to navigate through those spaces. And so that's really what my formal, or at least some of my formal training is in. If you read my bio, I just collect degrees in theology. That's basically my passion in life, is just collecting degrees because I like to read and write and try to figure out the mysteries of the universe, which is an adventure all into itself. So that's kind of a little bit about my background. I used to work in the interfaith community and interfaith ministries in Houston, which is where Claire and I met and did a lot of work together. It was so good. And then we just formed our friendship there, and we both moved on to different adventures, but that's how we connected and spent a good 6 years in doing that work in Houston and just getting to meet people from all different traditions and work with them and learn about all the different communities that are here in Houston, which is a fascinating thing. So currently live in Houston. I was born in Houston and went to school in Colorado and Boston and have traveled all around the world. And I love to travel and I love to learn things from different people and different communities and different faith traditions, different worldviews. And I find that it really tends to inform and deepen my own faith. So that's kind of who I am. I am a mother, as Claire said. I have a 19-month-old going on 10 years old. And she keeps me very, very busy. And so that that's basically what I do. My husband and I live outside of Houston. We are learning how to be parents every day. It's a new adventure. Yeah. That's a little bit about me, and I'm just so happy to be here in the conversation today.
Yeah, I am really glad that you're here. You said something when we were kind of having a preliminary conversation to get ready to have this conversation. You said that the first year of motherhood was like a death. And I was like, oh my God, I have to hear more about this. So I'm really like looking forward to digging into these like juicy details. And I'm also really looking forward also to hopefully having our next conversation about the themes of death and resurrection in Christianity, which is something I've thought about for a long
Yeah.
time, but like I felt like I really needed an expert, or at least somebody much more expert than I am, to like dive into that in a way that's not going to be shallow. So I'm super glad that we're making this connection.
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear. I'm excited to hear more about your journey too, because you had said, or I think on your website actually talked about how you kind of had a challenging experience growing up with Christianity, and that wasn't really the tradition for you. And so, I'm interested to kind of hear about some of that and some of your challenges, because I know you're not the only one, myself included. I've had my own challenges trying to understand how it all fits together. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a really good discussion,
Yeah.
and looking forward to that.
Yeah, likewise. I'm happy to get
So,
into that, and probably next week will be when it's more relevant, but I'm happy to answer questions as well as ask them. Um
great, great.
yeah, so I guess just following up on what you mentioned about how we met in Interfaith Ministries, which was fabulous. Anyone who lives in Houston should totally go check out their offerings. It was just such a wonderful time getting to meet people, and really for me, like being reintroduced to the Christian tradition too, because so many of the people doing interfaith work are Christians. So I'm wondering, maybe to sort of chronologically set the stage here. One of the things we had talked about earlier was what it was like, to come off of that identity as working for Interfaith Ministries. It's a pretty public role, and to end up transitioning out of that. So if that's a good jumping off place for you, that's great. If you have another place where you'd like to jump off and start with your story, that would be great too.
Yeah, no, we can definitely start there. Yeah, so I, like I said, I had done a lot of traveling throughout my life and in college, and one of the things I did was I got to go on a trip around the world and went to several different countries, and was able to go to different places of worship, and really to meet and kind of hear about different practices, and I'd always been interested in different religions growing up, but that experience really kind of drove that home for me. And so as I made my way through seminary the first time, I was just kind of trying to piece together all of the things that I had learned, and trying to really figure out my own theology, and come to terms with my own theology, which, like you said, we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later. But it really kind of brought me into the space of wanting to work with people from different traditions, and wanting to find a way to dialogue together, and ideally in my 20s, make the world a better place, and find ways that we could connect, and try to find more peace and harmony in our world, instead of so much division, between people of faith, which I think is all too common in our world,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. And I find that really sad, because I think that people who are really rooted in their faith tradition, even if they're, and sometimes especially if they're in a conservative uh, frame of their tradition, are really, passionate about what they believe, and how to be in the world, and they really have good intentions. And I know that's true for myself, that I deeply, love my faith tradition, and I deeply love God. And I felt like, how do I be this person in the world that makes the world a better place? What does that look like for me? And so through a series of things, I was sort of led to Interfaith Ministries, and so I started working there. And um, was very involved on on a very public scale of working with different faith communities, working with the mayor's office, just working in a very, as we might say, outward facing role, right? Trying to kind of figure out how do Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims, how do we all, get along and not only get along, but how do we find our points of commonality where we can make our community a better place to live, right? And so I think a lot of times we would get really hung up on what we would call doctrinal issues in the Christian tradition, and we kind of forget the practical side of theology, which is help people who need help, and feed people who don't have food. And what about medical care, and all these things that when you go to each faith tradition are very important. And there's always a component of reaching out to your neighbor and making the world a better place, and those who have, we have an obligation, we have a responsibility to help lift up and to come alongside those who may not have as many resources as we have, and to help, make life better. And so that was my real desire and goal in that role. And some days we did it well, and some days we struggled like anything else.
Yeah.
But as we've talked about, and I've noticed, on your other podcast, talking about transition and doing this idea of life, death, and resurrection, and what does it mean? We sort of started out this other conversation we were having the other day about, okay, but then I left my job, and everyone sort of did like this, like, look at me like, well, where are you going? What are you doing? Why are you leaving? We thought this was your identity, and
yes.
I got that question quite a lot, more than I expected, actually. And that was an interesting experience. And I ended up going and doing something else for about a year, working with women at a smaller organization. But, everyone still called me for interfaith things. It was really quite interesting, even after I had left, and it was like, but this is who you are,
Yeah.
And so that was a fascinating time in my life of, wow, I really had kind of defined that role for myself and that position. And then I kind of stepped out of it. And then about a year after I left that position.
I just want to go back to something you said. You said that you got the question, like, why did you leave? That was your identity. I'm kind of curious to hear more about that. Like, who asked you that and what was your answer at the time?
Yeah. Well, I had several board members who were very confused. And then, and I had a lot of people in different faith communities, actually. I mean, I had really formed some really solid relationships with leaders in faith communities, and they asked me, like, why are you leaving? Where are you going? And, I didn't have, I did have a next place I was going, but they just didn't really understand. And I think so many people had just really married, if you will, the idea of my person with that role that I was in.
Yes.
And so it was a very challenging thing for me to explain that. I had kind of, in a way, I felt like I had done what I could do in the role. And it was a new season for me. Like, I felt the new season coming. And, there are times in our lives, I think, where we just feel this, like, inner rising of, I have to do something else. I have to go somewhere else. There's change coming. And I felt that for a year and a half before I actually left my position at Interfaith.
Interesting.
And I kept trying to say no, and the voice kept getting louder and louder and louder. And finally it was like, literally for me, it was like songs on the radio and sermons in church and daily quiet time. It was like God could not have been more clear.
Yeah.
Like, it is time for you to exit. I have something else for you. And so I was like, okay. So I finally, made the decision to leave, and I actually left I mean, I actually gave my notice before I had another job, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really
Wow.
tell everybody what was going on, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a very stressful time.
Yeah.
Um, and I wasn't married at the time, so I didn't have income and and all these things that are important in our life, medical benefits,
Right. Right.
and so my parents were like, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" But thankfully, they've been around me long enough to know that, I do things like this because I feel like the Lord is calling to me and telling me to do things. And
Mm-hmm.
so far, it's always worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was sort of this moment of like, why is she doing this? From the outside, it just didn't make any sense. And I think we all have times in life like that where we just feel called to do something and it just doesn't make sense to
Mm-hmm.
anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Even maybe the people that are closest to us, and but you feel it inside and you're like, I just have to do it. I have to do it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I made that leap, and I resigned my position, and, it was, to be honest, on some levels, it was a deep sigh of relief,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew that I wasn't in the right place, in the right spot anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, it was deeply sad for me, and
Mm-hmm.
I would say, it took me a good 3 to 4 years to really mourn the loss of
Mm-hmm.
that role and that time of my life, because it was very formative. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I had made all of these relationships that, after I stepped out of that role, um, didn't really continue. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there were a
Mm-hmm.
few, there were a handful, maybe 5 or 10
Mm-hmm.
people that I still see or check in with regularly. But a lot of them, went away because our paths didn't cross often
Mm-hmm.
anymore, and that's life. Um, but that was hard.
Yeah.
That was really hard because I had kind of this whole world. I had constructed this whole world, and then I stepped out of it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very, very different. And so, yeah, that was absolutely a death.
Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely a death of so many things, and feeling like I had a position in the community and in
Mm-hmm.
society, feeling like I had a title, feeling like I had
Mm-hmm.
a role,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, about a year later, I actually stopped working, entirely, and went back and finished my schooling that I was doing,
Mm.
um, and then got married, and then I moved to the suburbs, and it was like a whole nother death happened
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
not only did I leave my job, but then I left my physical location.
Yeah.
So, even getting together for lunch or coffee with people was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there was just a whole lot of isolation
Mm-hmm.
that happened. And it was really, there have been a lot of death and resurrections in my life in the
Mm-hmm.
last 5 years, um,
Wow.
since I got married. And so, yeah, it's been really
Yeah.
interesting.
I'm I'm so curious. I want to hear more about the sort of deaths and how you mourned them. But I want to go back first. You said it took about 18 months from the time you knew you should leave Interfaith Ministries to the time you did. And I'm curious, what happened in that time? Um, like why did it take you so long? But then what shifted that made you want to finally leave?
Yeah, well, the thing is, if for anyone who's ever met me, you'll know that I might have a slight stubborn streak. Um, and I like to blame it on my red hair personally, but I don't know if that's the actual cause. But I'm a little stubborn, and I also think the deeper root of it for me, was fear.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there was so much fear for me about leaving my paycheck, leaving
Mm-hmm.
my benefits, leaving my like I said, leaving my role.
Mm-hmm.
Would I get another job that was of the same caliber?
Mm-hmm.
Would I be shooting myself in the foot? You know, all these things.
Yeah.
Um, and there was just so much fear around it for me. And I really felt like the Lord was just asking me to make this leap that I wasn't really prepared to
Mm-hmm.
make.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to be quite honest, I really battled in prayer over it for that whole time.
Wow.
Um, and it was a continual struggle. There were a lot of things going on. Um, at the job itself, we had some staff issues, but mostly it was just that like I said, I think I had kind of come to a different place in my life, and I needed something else, and I didn't know what that was that I
Mm.
needed.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew it was something else,
Mm-hmm.
and so I really couldn't explain it to people, which
Mm-hmm.
made it more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. People like a nice
And
explanation, like, oh, there's this other thing I have lined up, but that's not.
exactly, and and I have this clear path forward, and I have
Mm-hmm.
never had a clear path forward in my life, not ever. And so, I mean, I envy those people that are like 4 years old and they're like, I'm gonna be a fireman, or
Right.
I'm gonna be a doctor, or and they're like singularly focused and they just go. I'm not like that. That
Yeah.
is not my life experience. Um, but so I feel like I'm feeling my way through the dark most of the time in my
Mm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yet there are these like super clear rays of sunshine that come through for
Mm-hmm.
me. Um, and when I really like center myself and I have my quiet time and I breathe and I pay attention,
Mm-hmm.
I know the direction I need to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot of times getting through the fear. I think
Mm-hmm.
it really comes down to fear,
Mm-hmm.
because we are always drawn to the worst case scenario,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and it, for different people, it's different things, right? But whatever your worst case scenario is, um, mine has never come true.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's kind of where I find the beauty of this idea of life, death, and resurrection, because
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me that the Lord always has what I need
Right.
around after that death, right?
Right.
Like, I just don't know what it is, and I don't
Yeah.
know how to get there, and I don't
Yeah.
know that I even want it. So
Mm-hmm.
like, we were talking about like the fact that I'm living in a place of things that I said I would never do, right? I said I
Yes.
would never have kids. I would never live in the suburbs. I would never drive an SUV. I would never do any of
Oh.
those. Oh, and I was never going to live in Texas.
Oh,
Like, there's no,
really?
as an adult, I was never going to live in Texas. So I'm doing all the things that I said I was never going to do.
Oh, man.
And no, not even probably. I am the happiest and the most
Mm.
peaceful I have ever been in my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it funny how the universe takes it as like a dare?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I just don't say them
Yeah.
anymore. I mean, I have
Right.
learned my lesson on that one. I'm like, no, I'm just not gonna. I'm
Right.
not gonna tempt the Lord on that one anymore, and just gonna say, well, this is what I always say now. I would prefer not to.
Right.
I would
Exactly.
I would prefer not to go down that road. But if that's the road I need to go down, I will go.
There we go.
I will go. I will try not to scream and kick, but I can't promise you anything.
Right.
So, yeah. So I'm living in this state of nevers,
Mm-hmm.
but I sit here in my home and I look out over my backyard with my little plants that are flowering and all
Mm-hmm.
these beautiful trees that surround me, and my life it is not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so full of love and it is
Mm-hmm.
full of peace, and there
Mm-hmm.
are so many blessings in it. And so I look at that and I'm like, okay, I'm in a place where I needed to be, but I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
I needed to be there. And I never would have probably made the choices to get here
Mm-hmm.
without those promptings of the inner Holy Spirit saying,
Mm-hmm.
"This is the
Mm-hmm.
next step. This is the next step." And I just thought, how can this be the next step?
Yeah.
I don't understand, but it was, and here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
I'm kind of curious, the chronology of like leaving interfaith ministries, getting married, deciding to have a child. I mean, it seems like a whole sort of series of deaths and rebirths. Um, so how did that play out, like which came first and um yeah, whatever you feel like sharing about that process.
yeah, I mean, it absolutely was, which is why, like, so for people listening, I got Claire's email about death and rebirth and resurrection. I was like, oh my God, we have to have a conversation.
I
This
was
is
so
my whole
happy.
life.
Yeah.
This is my whole life. We must talk. Um, so yes, chronology is an interesting thing. Like I said, so my first date with my husband, I told him I'm never having kids. So I don't want kids. I don't know if I said never, but I might have. I said I don't want kids. I don't want to physically have a child.
Hmm.
And my sweet, loving husband just said, okay, which is kind of his response in general when I come out with some strong statement. Um, that's why we're married. But he just kind of went with the flow, and you know, I don't know. It was just sort of we dated for a very long time. We dated for about 4 years before we
Mm.
got married, 5 years, I guess, um, I got older, and he is from Egyptian family,
Oh,
and
cool.
his um, family just loves kids, and
Mm.
they they would like me to have like 6 kids, which is not happening. But
Right.
so I don't know. So there was all this, and there was never any like pressure. It wasn't that. It was just
Mm-hmm.
it was important. It was just valued to them, and then um, I don't know. Maybe his mom prayed a lot. I'm not sure. I think she probably did. I know my mom did because she wanted a grandchild, but um, she wasn't sure she was ever going to get one. So there was
Conspiracy
probably a
of the
lot of
moms.
motherly prayers
Yeah.
that happened. Um, and then, I mean, it's just sort of a series of events. And um, I don't know, but it was interesting. So I was doing my schooling for spiritual direction,
Mm.
and I was kind of looking through this whole thing because we hadn't decided to get married yet, my husband and
Mm.
I. And one of the big issues was, were we going to have children or not?
Mm.
And you can't. That's there's no compromise on that one. It's yes or
Right.
no.
It's binary.
Um, yeah. So that was kind of a place where we had to come to some sort of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we were trying to make our way through that process, I ended up um, having a spiritual direction client who was unexpectedly pregnant,
Mm.
and there was this very interesting exchange that happened between us, and it was just she was so peaceful about the whole situation, and she was newly married, and she was
Mm.
still like, I mean, it was just this whole thing where she was like, this is not when I thought I was going to have a kid, but here we are.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so there was so much grace, and like it's sort of hard to describe, but I really felt like she was sent to me,
Mm.
um, to just kind of give me this peace
Mm-hmm.
that even if you don't think things are gonna go well, or you should or shouldn't have a baby. I don't know. It was just I just felt like she was sent to me to say, I see you, Lauren. I understand that you're scared, um, but I have grace for you in this,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna be with you through it, and I need you not to be so afraid.
Mm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so she was sort of this messenger for me. Like it was just very interesting. And so that summer when I was working with her, there was just this time when I was praying and I was having some quiet time. I'm a big journaler, and so
Mm.
I was writing in my journal, and I had some scripture or something that I was reading, and I just remember the Lord just speaking to my spirit and saying, um, "You're gonna have a kid, and it's gonna be the most profound experience of the cross that you will ever have in your life.
Wow. Wow, what a moment.
And I wrote it down and I was like, really? Like, what? Really? I mean, are you sure? Like, are you sure? Really? Because I thought we had already discussed this, and I wasn't really on board with it. And okay, so I mean, that was like, if there was a moment, that was like the moment when the decision to have a kid happened. And that was really probably, I mean, that was at least 2 years before we got pregnant.
Oh wow.
So it was a long time, but I just knew in my spirit that was what the Lord had for me. But you know, I have to say, like, a lot of people, I have so much respect because there are so many women and couples that desperately want to have kids and can't have kids. And I have friends who have PCOS. And I mean, there's just so many issues around fertility. So, you know, I just, for all the people struggling with it, my heart goes out to you. You know, and I just have to say that because it can be such a horrendous struggle for so many. But for me, it was such a different struggle. It was a struggle about losing control of my body.
Wow. Yeah.
Losing control of my life in a way. And, you know, I had just really had a lot of emotional up and downs growing up. I had struggled with depression. My parents were divorced when I was younger. There were so many things that went into this concept of birthing a child and having this child depend on me, being, you know, connected forever to another human being, to this child. There were so many things to me that were so significant about it and really utterly terrifying. And, you know, I got to the point where I had really made peace with being connected to my husband forever because he's just awesome. And that was okay with me.
Right.
I got there. It's like, okay, I'm okay with that.
It's a little less invasive.
You know, yeah. But some of the emotional stuff around it, and for me, honestly, the body stuff was just so much of a struggle. And so I, you know, after I graduated college, I started getting these horrible, like, daily headaches. And they have continued since then, which that was 2003. So I've been having a daily headache for 17 years. And it's just sort of miserable. And I don't talk about it a lot because I hate to focus on it. And I don't like to give it a lot of energy, I guess you could say. But it's there, and some days it's worse and some days it's better. But that was part of my bodily issue with having a kid. It was like I was just terrified because I was like, what happens when my kid is crying or screaming or 2 years old and having a tantrum like she does, and she just looks at me and she just screams bloody murder, and I have a headache, and I'm like, this sucks. Like, this just sucks. So, like, there are these moments, right, where you just, like, you're literally dying in the moment. I mean, you truly are, you know, and you're like, okay, just breathe. That's all we can do right now is just breathe. Everybody breathe, you know? And so there's that. And, like, you know, it sounds superficial, but I think it's such a big deal for so many women. Like, I grew up not loving my body, and I just wasn't in the mood to, like, get all fat and pregnant and then, you know, have to deal with the aftermath. And let me tell you, it's been an aftermath. Like, it's 20 months later and I'm finally back, sort of, to where I was before I had a kid.
Oh,
Because let me tell you, your
congratulations.
body is never the same. Your body is never, ever the same. Like
Yeah.
you might stay the same number on the scale, but it will never, the parts don't go back to where they were. They just don't.
That's what I've heard.
Okay. Yeah. That's just the way it is. And so you have to make your peace with that, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so how do I make my peace with that? And for the culture we live in, for the society we live in, it's a huge deal. You know,
Yeah.
we can pretend that or I guess I could pretend that I'm spiritually above all that,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. And I
Yeah.
look at pictures of myself and I think, oh God, how many chins do I have in that? Why do I have 6 chins in that picture? I
Oh.
don't understand. You know, and so, but I just say that it is a death, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a death
Yeah.
of who you have been in your life, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have to somehow make your way through that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm still making my way through that. I haven't come to the other side quite yet on that
Mm-hmm.
one,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I'm still in the process of that one, and that one for me may just be a lifelong. I don't know, but
And when you say that
you
one, do you
know,
mean
but
like the body issues and the sort of physicality of having
yeah,
had a child?
yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
physicality of having a child, the just the ability to be at home in your body,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now I'm dealing with aging, right? Like I'm almost
Right.
40,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a whole nother set of stuff, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
your whole body just changes, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're like things you used to be able to do, you can't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, we're continually going through these different stages and seasons,
Mm-hmm.
um, over and over again, and I think there's very little like motherhood that
Mm-hmm.
brings about this whole life, death, and resurrection cycle. And I feel like it kind
Mm-hmm.
of comes every day, um,
Mm.
in different ways.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one of the things I think that you know I realize is just how selfish I was before,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and probably still am because because I still kind of want the things I want when I want them, right? But I don't have control over that at all
Yeah.
anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
it's my life is 95% focused around um, the needs of someone else right now,
Wow.
and
Wow. Talk about
how
spiritual practice.
they yes, it is. I mean, there is truly nothing like being a parent, a mother, that keeps you in the present moment. I mean,
Mm.
if you're struggling to be in the present moment, take care of a kid for a day, and you will have some mastery level skills. Like it is ridiculous. Um, yeah, I mean, there's just people ask me about things now, like, did you see such and such on the news, or did you, what do you think about this? I'm like, I
Mm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The world kind of is burning down around me, and I'm like, I can't even. I don't know, because there's a child that I have to figure out if she's going to eat bananas or cream cheese or peanut butter, because those are the things my kid eats. You know.
Right. Yeah,
So.
I'd like to take a moment and pause on this because I feel like I went through something similar when my mom was really sick, like,
Mm,
I don't know if I told you, but she ended up passing away of cancer quite a while ago now. And
mm,
I think there's
mm.
something about that, like, that state of being so focused on someone else that really refocuses your energy. And I'm just curious to hear if you have more thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, well, and taking care of someone who's sick, that's a huge thing too, because I worked as a hospice chaplain for about
Mm.
18 months.
Oh, wow.
And so I worked with families who were in that constant state of
Mm.
caring,
Yeah.
for, their loved ones, and some of them for years. I mean,
Yeah.
you just don't know how, exiting this life is challenging.
Mm.
But yeah, that's a wonderful point. For people who are in that moment of taking taking care of anyone, right? I mean, if you have
Right, right.
a kid with special needs, or you have you know, a husband or a wife or a partner who's sick or just gone through surgery. I mean, there's so many times, right, in life when we can be focused on someone else.
Yeah. Learning how to be a mom.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's so many forms of motherhood. There's so many forms of
Oh,
motherhood.
that's a good point.
Um,
Oh, wow.
and
That kind of like cracks open the context of this whole conversation.
yeah, I mean, being a mother is divine, right? I mean, it's a divine calling. It's part of our nature. Um, I mean, it truly is. It's embodying the divinity. I mean, my husband is like the best mom when I'm sick. Like
Oh.
he's awesome. Like he's so good. I am not very good in the reverse. Let me just say, like I always apologize to him. I'm like, I'm sorry, honey. I know I could be a better mom to you right now, but I struggle. It's kind of funny, you know, the things that we're good at, you know, and the things we have skills at. But yeah, we all have that potential to be a mother, you know, to different people or animals, or I don't know. Some people are great with plants. That is not my skill. I tend to kill plants, so whatever. But I've kept my kid alive, so that
There we go. There we go.
But yeah, I mean, I think anything that takes the focus off the self, right? And so much of, I think, what I don't know, maybe you can speak to this. I mean, you can obviously speak to this a lot better than I can, but it'd be interesting maybe to talk a little bit about how, you know, Buddhism encourages us to take the focus off of what we think is the self, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I was just kind of curious, you know, about your own experience. Yeah, I just find it so easy to kind of let all my attention and energy get pulled out and sucked out into the outside world. And, you know, you're kind of talking about I almost feel like there's a center of gravity, you know, pulling your attention like in, you know, to time spent with your daughter and with yourself and with the present moment. And it feels different to not be trying to keep up with the latest calamity out in the world. And there are many, and it's completely legitimate to keep up with them. But I'm just kind of curious to hear, I don't know, if you had any other thoughts about for you what that's like to kind of unplug, whether it's, I don't know, feels good or bad or isolating or empowering to kind of have the, I don't know, the internal liberty to not try and follow the news.
Yeah. Well, you know, I do have thoughts about it. On the one hand, I think it's a luxury, because I'm in a place where I kind of can right now live without being so totally affected by everything that's going on. But there are so many people that that's not the reality for. So there's also a part of me that feels a little guilty, because I realize that that's not everyone's situation, and that I'm, you know, I'm kind of in a privileged situation, if you will. But there's another part of me that knows that I only have a certain amount of energy. And I have to be very careful about where I spend my energy. And I've learned that over my life. I've always been a person that has a certain amount of. We all are like that, right? Some of us have, I think, maybe bigger tanks than others. I don't know, but so for me, it's a very practical thing, because my child, the child that I was sent, she's very active. She's very engaged. She's very inquisitive. She's very smart. She wants my attention all the time. And the reality of what we're doing is, you know, that's kind of what she's got right now. She doesn't have a lot of friends. She doesn't have school. She, you know. So
it's age appropriate.
I think, yeah, it is very age appropriate. And but it's interesting because I just keep going back to, chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes in scripture, and it says, there's a time and a season for everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a time to live, there's a time to die, there's a time to mourn, there's a time to dance.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a time for everything. And so I think one of the things that I would encourage others about is that I think a lot of times we tend to judge our daily life in the totality of living,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so like we think, oh well, I'm not doing enough on this. Like I'm not active in Black Lives Matter. I'm not active in getting out the vote. I'm not doing this, and this right now. But the reality is you can't do everything all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the thing that I'm called to do right now is being a mom 95% of the time. And then the other 5% of the time, I recharge my batteries, I sign petitions, I do podcasts, I read scripture, I have a little bit of time for myself, but the season I'm in right now is full on being a mom to a toddler. And I realize that season is not forever.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is I think that we get stuck in this idea that, we're judging the season by all these like standards that's not fair for the season that we're in.
Yeah.
Because there will be a passing to the season. And one day, my kid will be in school, and one day she'll be an adult and she will have her own life, and I will have all my hours back in my day again to try to make the world a better place or go on vacation or do whatever it is that, I'm called to do in that season. So that's how I encourage myself and kind of give myself some grace, because I realize, okay, I'm in charge of helping to form the soul right now. And that's pretty important work.
Yeah.
And it does draw you into the present, unlike anything else. But there's some beautiful stuff about that too, because I don't know, I look at trees differently, and I look at rocks differently, and there is something just glorious about seeing the world through a child's eyes, because everything is new to them, and it's so cliche, but it's so true. They see things that you've seen your whole life, and you think, oh yeah, that really is pretty awesome. I forgot how awesome that is. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you for bringing me back to that truth that I've forgotten. So yeah, I would say it's like everything else. It's a complex reality, right?
Yeah, there was a time that you were dedicating kind of most of your energy to trying to make society better and foster understanding. And, I'm thinking of your time at Interfaith Ministries when there was a lot of like Islamophobia. And I feel like part of what we did and the stuff we did together was to try and combat that. So, it was a different season.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a different season. And so I think, it just ties so beautifully into, again, this idea of life and death and resurrection, because this season too will pass, and then there will be something in the next season. And so, I'm just learning so much about, like you said, trying to be present and trying to enjoy the season I'm in. I was very tempted to like try to create some projects for myself. Namely a website with like all these like materials and writings and all this kind of stuff, right? Because I like to write and everything, and I had laid it all out, and I had signed up.
Oh wow.
I bought a subscription, everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'd done all this work. I'd spent like
Mm-hmm.
maybe 4 or 5 weeks doing it, kind of
Wow.
putting it together. And then it just dawned on me one day. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me before I started all the work, but I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this is not how I need to be spending my free time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I I have to rest. I have to
Yeah.
recharge. I have
Yeah.
to, be with my husband. I have to be with
Mm-hmm.
my family. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
need to just not have something that I'm obligated or feel obligated to do
Mm-hmm.
when I put my child down for the night. Like
Yeah.
I need to savor the fact that I can take this time, that I don't have to work, for
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
And and that's just what I am. But I think, I don't know, I want to encourage people that take take a real look at your life, and what are those places where you can say no? You
Mm-hmm.
know, you can there I think there are more places than we think.
Yeah.
And you can say no to things that take away that energy that you need for the things that really are mandatory that are
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah. Brene Brown talks about the hustle for worthiness. Um, and I feel like there's a real like addiction to having something going on. Like there's like an allergy almost to space and to rest and all the things you're talking about. And within our culture right now in the US, and to me it feels like that's one of the major things I've learned through my transitions is like especially this death process and then this sort of like in between state. It's like learning to appreciate a fallow field, and maybe something is planted but we're not actively working that field right now. um so I appreciate you're putting that out there because I feel like that's often lost. um we all, I think, well, I don't want to say all, but most of us, I think, feel that compulsion to like be productive, and to justify any time we're like, quote, taking off by merely spending all of our energy and attention on another human.
Yeah, I think that's a it's a great point, and Brene has some awesome resources on that. And I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
for whatever reason, that's just kind of been a lot of my season that I've been in the last
Mm-hmm.
3 years, is just sort of this readjustment, to life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
um, I feel like I'm coming through that. I feel like I'm such a better person.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I really do. Like, I really do. Like, I feel
Mm.
like, I look back on my early career and the kind of like boss that I was,
Mm.
because I had a staff, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I kind of cringe a little. Um, and I just like I look at that person, I'm like, oh wow, that's
Mm.
wow. If I could go back, I would definitely change some things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, things that I thought were so important,
Mm-hmm.
and weren't. And part of that's because I was 20 something and,
Yeah.
very young. Um, but I look now how the Lord has kind of grown me through this season, and I
Mm.
think that that's a great analogy, that when we think about like seeds being planted,
Mm-hmm.
or things that are growing underneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we are growing, we are
Yeah.
learning, we are quote unquote doing something.
Yeah.
Um, but if we don't give ourselves space to
Mm-hmm.
process and to just to be, I don't think we can make our way through those transitions successfully and
Yes.
well.
Yes.
You know,
Totally. I totally
and I
agree.
think that's super important. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I think our world has lost that, and I think that's a lot of why, um, we're in the state that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
To be
Mm-hmm.
honest, because we've lost a lot of the ways that people gained emotional maturity,
Yeah.
um, and we're reaping the effects of that now.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
yeah, I think it's super important. And it's super hard, right? It's like
Yes.
I was reading something about like in the front of or in the beginning of Tima's book, the places that scare you. She's
Mm.
talking about how like the just the practice of sitting
Mm-hmm.
in Buddhism is like teaches you about being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be the first to admit that I am not a great meditator because I get super uncomfortable and I'm not
Mm.
great at sitting in that discomfort.
Mm.
Um, so I would say like I meditate, but I meditate in all kinds of different ways. But actual sitting practice is talk about death. Like I feel like it's death to me. So I have a
Yeah.
long way to go on that one. Um, and I'm like amazed by those monks that can just sit and sit and sit and sit. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, how do you do that? But that even metaphorically, the ability to sit and be present in
Mm-hmm.
life without having to do something or control
Mm-hmm.
something or fix something
Yeah.
or just to let it work inside of you is
Mm-hmm.
a huge spiritual practice, regardless of your faith tradition. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I think there's something about trusting that the process is happening, that we actually don't have control. That sometimes like taking our hands off the wheel is like the perfect response to what's happening in our lives. So
right?
uncomfortable. So uncomfortable.
It's completely counterintuitive to our culture,
Yeah.
and and against everything that we're taught. And I mean, there's a lot of unlearning that
Yeah.
has to happen in the
Yeah.
spiritual journey
Yeah.
because it's just not. It's not what the world teaches you, and
No.
this there's so many scriptures to me that come alive when I think about the reality of the spiritual journey. That
Mm.
like Jesus says, you will be in the world but not of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, yeah, we have to live in this chaos,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not of this chaos. Like we're not
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be going along the way everybody
Mm.
goes along.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we're really called to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how we're called to live. That's not how we're made to live.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and how do we get back to what we were really created to be?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for each one of us, I think, like we talked about before, like the practical places of your life, that's where to me, that's where you learn what your faith really teaches,
Yeah.
because I mean, your faith should not be distinct from your life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
really is your guide, it's your roadmap, it's it's the way to teach you how to handle whatever's happening in your life.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think these moments of, especially the death part of a death and rebirth process, that's when I've seen my own practice really, all of a sudden I realize it's supporting me through that in a way that's completely different from how it would have been, if my goal was whatever my job was at the moment or, something else that like is more valued in society, but that doesn't really see you through the hard times in the same way.
right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like just hearing your story of transition makes me reflect on stuff that's happened for myself, but it also like inspires me and there's ways that you've thought about things that are really new. So I really appreciate your like willingness to have this conversation. It's a pretty vulnerable conversation. And yeah, so thank you for sharing with me and whoever is listening to this.
Yeah. You're so welcome. And I always just hope that anything I share is an encouragement to other people. And it's just, um, I always like to say I'm rowing in the boat with you.
Mhm.
That we're in this together, that you're not alone.
Yeah.
I feel like, a lot of times it's just feel like, wow, does anybody know what I'm going through? But
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
do. We're all going through the same stuff.
Yeah.
It just looks different from the outside. So
Exactly. Maybe for you it's motherhood and for me it's a whole bunch of other things and someone else out there thinks they're the only one going through their thing and but the outlines are the same or at least similar.
and the thoughts of like, how do I get through this moment? And will I ever like myself in blue jeans again?
Right. Am I
all
lazy
these
for
things
taking
that
time off?
yeah, am I lazy? Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
do people gonna think I'm crazy if I make this decision? Probably,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah. So
okay.
what? Yeah,
That's
exactly.
okay.
Yeah. You pay a price, something does die, but then the thing that's reborn is something beyond what you could be if you didn't take that step.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, this has been so lovely. Thank you. And I am really looking forward to our next conversation. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation with Lauren Santerre, and I hope you'll join us again next week when Lauren talks about her personal rebirth into motherhood and also Christian teachings on resurrection and what that means for her in her personal and spiritual life. Thanks for coming along for today's exploration of the process of letting grow. If you found this episode helpful, please share it. And subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts so you're always in the loop. For links to more content related to today's episode, please see the show notes. See you again next week.